So where do you think we need to go next to start to dismount all this? I mean, the way I see where the American empire, and it is an empire, and like every other empire, it will crumble, and it already is.
It is, yeah.
I think we are crumbling, and I think that, and the one shred of hope that I do have, and something that I say on this show, and some people find it refreshing, other people just disagree with me, and I get it, but I keep saying, I'm like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. The fall from grace can actually be, the entire world will be better off when we're not setting the Middle East on fire. That's for damn sure. Yeah. The entire world, including people in the United States, obviously. But also, like, our fall from grace doesn't necessarily have to be brutal. It can be, we just really reprioritize what type of society we want to be. And that's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a collective effort from all of us. But it's not impossible. Would you agree with that, or do you think we're just screwed? like, what do you think? Like, what do you think needs to happen societally to get us to a better tomorrow?
Oh yeah, I mean, there has to be a revolution, right?
Right.
So what form does that take, and how does it look, and how are we going to get there? And I couldn't agree more that that's the real question, because the pessimistic kind of sideline approach where you just stand back and describe how screwed we are as the train goes screeching into a concrete wall is not particularly helpful. And at the end of the day, the world that is going to be made in the future, right? Like you were referencing Australia here, and them being kind of out in front of us, at least in the time zones, that world is a world that's going to be made a struggle, and it depends on what we do. And I would say at least two things. One is I fully agree that the American empire has entered into, and has been for quite some time now, into a phase of decadence. It is crumbling, and it cannot maintain its power in the same way that it could in earlier eras, and that's a very, very good thing. But it does also mean that the ruling class, in order to consolidate its power, will resort to new and different tactics. I'd give a shout out here to the great book by William I. Robinson called The Global Police State, where he talks about militarized accumulation and the increased investment in the military and in really draconian policing tactics globally as a site to make profit, and also to crush revolutionary insurgencies. And so that process of decadence means that the ruling class has a problem on its hands, and it's got to find ways of solving that. And so the resurgence of these more authoritarian or fascist modes of governance around the world are related to that problem. The other thing that I think is really important to highlight is that the ecological crisis is of such extreme proportions that it is very clear that in the coming years, there's a choice to be made, and that is humanity going to survive in some form, or is it not? And so I'm absolutely 100% convinced that capitalism is going to collapse, and the real question is whether or not it takes all of us with it, because capitalism will destroy the conditions of possibility of human existence. That's what it's doing on planet Earth. It's not just us as humans, right? It's the biosphere. And so this is all kind of prefacing then the real question is, well, then how do we build power? And I think it's really important to recognize that the mechanisms of political representation that we have in this country are absolutely corrupt. There's not a way of reforming them. And we have to do what has been done, because there's lots of models for this elsewhere in the world. And that is build real socialist power in anti-capitalist organizations that are driven from the ground up, and that begin to mobilize people, as we're already doing. I'm involved with these organizations myself, and from what I understand about your work, you are as well. We've got to build that power. We've got to do it quickly, and we've got to we've got to tap into the deep history of socialist organizing to find the best tactics and the best strategies for getting us to a place where we can fight and really win in the kind of belly of the imperial beast in the United States.
What are some of those best tactics?
The best tactics for developing power?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the organizations that I'm involved with are really looking at, if you start to get into the concrete aspects of it, a lot of socialist organizing in the United States at one point was based on sites of production, because there were factories and things in the United States. But through the globalization of production chains, a lot of that production has been moved out of the United States. And so if you want to build like working class power, one way of doing that is through neighborhood community organizing. And so one of the organizations that I work with, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we do a lot of community organizing that is about a number of different things. One of them is demonstrating to people how a socialist party that is driven by people power would actually deal with various crises. So we run an US program, which is a unity and survival program that brings free groceries to families in need throughout the entire time of the pandemic. And that is not simply, it's not an act of charity. It is a form of mutual aid, but mutual aid to build power in order to demonstrate to people what a socialist government would look like, and also to bring people into that struggle. We also do a lot of political education so people can have their minds opened up beyond the kind of spectrum of the Democratic Party and maybe its progressive wing and some other things. But two, I mean, there's a ton of, you know, anti-capitalist parties and anti-capitalist organizations that are out there. We also, of course, do a lot around anti-racist organizing, anti-fascist organizing. And I mean, I could kind of go on at length about the various projects that we're involved in, but maybe the easiest thing to do would be encourage people who are interested, check out the Party for Socialism and Liberation, check out the Liberation Center in Philadelphia and what we've been up to there. And there's lots of other great orgs that are out there. I think that, you know, for my taste, at least, the most important thing is anti-capitalist. At least begin with that. And maybe one other thing that I would say, and I'm not sure if we're on the same page about this, and push back if you disagree, but there are certain forms of socialism that think that the ruling class can be voted out of power. And if someone could give me an example of that, historically, you know, I might eventually be convinced, but I know of no single historical example where the ruling class was voted out of power and stayed out of power, right? There are some instances where there were really progressive parties that worked through electoral mechanisms. And I do believe in working through tactically, not strategically, like you use the electoral system, but strategically, at the end of the day, we need a system change. And the ruling class is not going to allow that to happen through the ballot box at the end of the day, right? We can do that to build power, but at the end of the day, we're talking about real class struggle.
I don't think I can disagree with you there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can give you like my take, and you can pick holes in that. Might be a better way to do it. But my take is electoralism is one of very many tools in the toolkit of change. It is a tool that I think is often over amplified and is often put on a pedestal it doesn't deserve to be on. I have been guilty of doing that myself. Because I'm human, and I try really hard not to do that and to check myself. And it's been a learning process and a growing process. I put a much higher emphasis on community organizing, like you said, acting locally, you know, trying to just kind of do something to make your neighborhood a little bit better. For me personally, I'm a big municipal broadband advocate. I try to put a lot of my energy into that. Having city-owned internet to preserve a free and open internet so that people can bring up really, really good ideas with a cat comic behind them. You know, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. And so yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at. And when it comes to electoralism, I do see, like you said, I do see value in being strategic about it and trying to use it as one of many tools for change. And I think one of the best things to do is act locally there too. I get contacted by countless people saying they want to run for Congress, saying they want to run for Senate. And I applaud that effort. I really do. And I try to support candidates where I can. But I wish I would get more emails of people saying they want to run for city council, of people saying they want to try to be mayor, of people trying to get on a neighborhood council board. Yes, this is not as sexy. And yes, I'm not going to sit here and say that corruption doesn't happen at the local level. Of course it does. I mean, half of local politics are all just a bunch of real estate developers most of the time. But why is that? It's because they know that they can use their power there and they can just kind of make their community their playground. Well, guess what? If you really rally people and you say, this community is not a developer's playground, this community is our home. this is where we live, well, then you can try to take some power back, I think, at the local level. So what's your response to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I mean, I think that the most helpful kind of conceptual distinction for me is just separating out tactics from strategy. And if you understand tactics as these are kind of short-term things that you do given the nature of the situation, but strategy is your end goal and how you're going to get there. And that electoralism as a tactic, as long as you don't overemphasize its importance, I think is, it's the way in which under bourgeois democracies, that's how at least the political theater operates, right? So if we can play that game at times better than other people play the game, and we can also use the media platform that's given to certain people, right? Like in other countries, when you have presidential candidates who are Marxists or who are socialists or whatever, they're on TV and they get a platform for that. And it would be great to have a lot more of that, right? Like there was the communist who was running in Vermont.
I had him on the show.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool.
Yeah. He's an interesting dude. I like talking to him.
Yeah, sweet. I saw him on another show and I thought he was good. Yeah.
Amazing beard, that guy. He's got an amazing beard. I complimented his beard.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have shaved then. I should have taken a little bit more of the Marx look, right? But yeah, so I agree with that. And I think you're absolutely right that like it's local, regional, national, and international. And you've got to try to keep all that in perspective. And that we have more power the closer we get to where we're living. And so like the stuff that I was talking about with the Liberation Center in Philadelphia, a lot of these are local struggles and like very minute struggles at times, but that have far-reaching consequences. But we also have to keep a kind of internationalist perspective in mind and not just take the coordinates of our political activism from the United States, because its political culture historically has been, frankly, very reactionary. What we call the left in the United States is basically the center-right historically. These are like pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist positions. And so I would also just encourage people to, think politically outside of the American box.
I want to ask you this, and you're really preaching to the choir there, where it's like, look, what we call the left is, I always say, I'm like, look, if I lived in Denmark or Canada or Switzerland, I would just be considered, he's on the left. In the United States, I'm considered watch list. So yeah, our Overton window is absolutely ridiculous. Do you think that is slowly changing though? For the better?
There has definitely been, with the combination of the pandemic and because like the objective situation has been changing over the last 3 to 5 years in a lot of different ways. And that change, I think, does bring with it extraordinary possibilities, and that there are openings now that are very, like I grew up in, I don't know if we're maybe about the same age, but at least for me, I grew up in probably one of the darkest moments of like socialist consciousness in the history of the Americas. Because I grew up in the United States like in the 1980s and 1990s, and it was dark. There was nobody out there. And like the most left you could get in the kind of at least more or less mainstream spectrum was still pretty imperialist. And so I agree that there's a, like, the kids are hungry for communism. And there's a lot of people who are out there who don't want the kind of standard fare. And that's really exciting. A lot of the people that I kind of militate with in Philadelphia and more broadly, they're young people. I'm like the grandpa in the room. And it's great because I'm like, sweet, teach me about your worldview. Let me hopefully, share some stuff from my perspective, and let's move things, in the right direction. So I do share your optimism. I would just say it's a concrete optimism. It's not like hope in some Obama sense. It's not some ideology campaign. I have hope because I've seen people who are younger than me struggle in ways that inspire me, empower me, and demonstrate to me what is really possible if we shore up the struggle and we struggle together. And that's real hope.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because, occasionally, first of all, like I've said that, I occasionally get those tweets where people are just like, oh, like those condescending tweets where they're just like, oh, your optimism's so endearing. And my response is always like, first of all, if I'm a picture of optimism to you, I feel sorry for you. If I'm the type of guy where you look at that guy is just so optimistic, and I like you.
I saw some tweet you were listening to Jethro Tull this morning, right? That doesn't sound too optimistic to me.
I listen to Jethro Tull most mornings. Why wouldn't you? There's a nice soothing flute in it. Why? How do you not? No, I'm a big Tull fan. I like to start my mornings off with some classic rock and
cool.
Finding out what's going on in the world and how horrible it is. but no, like I'll get those tweets, and the thing for me is like every shred of optimism I have, and it is out there. I have a very realistic optimism. Because every shred of optimism I have, I can back it up. I can tell you why I feel that way. I can tell you that my hope in electoralism is lower than it ever had been, and it's always been very low. Most of my life, it's always been low. But I do have optimism in some of the things you just referenced. And, I remember, and this isn't going back to the 80s or 90s. This is going back to 2008. I can remember, when people were looking at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears because I said, look, if Obama gets the nomination, I'll vote for him in the general. But right now, I'm supporting Dennis Kucinich because that guy's for single-payer healthcare. Obama's not. And they looked at me like, what the hell are you talking about? That ain't the case anymore. People are really in tune with those types of policies and those types of ideas now. And they're not dirty words anymore. I do remember socialism being a very, very dirty word. It's not anymore. That has changed drastically, and that is a good thing.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. An article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your